Today's topic is punctuation, specifically ellipsis points. If you've got 5 minutes, I've got 5 tips that might help you use them better. One of the most annoying things that my grammar checker does when I'm writing is to tell me to remove ellipsis points. Generally speaking, I have carefully inserted them into my manuscript for specific effects, and yet my AI assistant doesn't seem to understand that. And quite often, my AI assistant, Grammarly, which is the one I use, is wrong, but not always. And I'm going to tell you why. So because of my own personal issue with ellipsis points or ellipses, I thought it might be a topic that we should talk about, because if we explored it together, I might be able to give you some tips on how to use them better. Maybe use them at all if you're not using them now, because they can be very effective in your narrative. Before we get to my 5 tips, of course, I always like to make sure we're all on the same page. So let's just look at the definition of ellipsis points. Ellipsis points, ... commonly known as ellipses, are used in writing to indicate an omission, pause, or unfinished thought. Okay, now that we're all on the same page about that, let's look at 5 tips to help us all use them better. Tip number 1, use ellipses to indicate that you're omitting something when you're using a direct quote. You don't always have to use the complete quote that you want to insert into your piece of writing. And this is really common when doing academic and scholarly writing, that you want to quote something, but the quote is really long and you don't need all of it. So you can use ellipses to indicate that you've left something out. And it means that when the reader looks at it, the reader understands that you have truncated the quote. But one of the things you have to be really careful about is that by omitting words, you don't change the sense of the quote. You don't make it mean something that it didn't mean in the first place, and that could happen. Here's an example. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. And if you put an ellipsis in, the quick brown fox over the lazy dog. Now, to be honest, I wouldn't suggest that you use that kind of a quote, but I think you understand what I'm saying when you want to use a quote and you don't need all of the extraneous material in the middle of it. So you just use the ellipsis points for people to understand that you have left something out. Then they know that you've left it out. Tip number 2, use ellipses to improve your pacing. Ellipses can be used very effectively to create suspense or to indicate a pause. Here's an example. He looked out the window and saw nothing. There's a pause, there's a hesitation there, creates a bit of suspense. Tip number 3, use ellipses to indicate a speaker's hesitation. If you use ellipses correctly in dialogue, they can represent a character's hesitation or trailing off. Here are some examples. I was thinking that maybe we could, never mind. The hesitation there. Then, I was thinking that maybe we could, and a trailing off. But you need to remember that if a person is interrupted, you don't use ellipses at the end of the dialogue. You would use an em dash. I was thinking that maybe we could. If the speaker is interrupted, the em dash indicates clearly to the reader that that's what has happened, that the person has not trailed off, but they've been interrupted. And so obviously in an interruption, there then needs to be another speaker. Tip number 4, avoid overusing ellipses. Ellipses can be very powerful, but the overuse of them results in narrative that is fragmented and disjointed. You need to use them judiciously to improve the clarity and the flow of your narrative. Tip number 5, be sure to use proper formatting. I have to say that this is the part of using ellipses that gets me every time, because some of the formatting, which is absolutely correct, looks very odd. I know that I use this formatting incorrectly sometime, which has to do with the spacing around ellipses, but I think it's my duty to tell you the proper way to do it. Ellipses typically consist of 3 dots with a space before and after them. And if you use ellipses at the end of a sentence, ... you are supposed to put a period there, effectively having 4 dots at the end of a sentence. Which usually, and that is usually in dialogue, for example, then you have your quotation marks. However, it always looks very odd to me. My grammar checker always tells me to do that, and I look at it and I think that can't be right. But I'm here to tell you that that is actually the correct way to punctuate with ellipses. So you can break that rule at your peril. Your editor might not like it so much. And if you look at these examples on the screen, you'll see what I'm talking about. In the first example, within a sentence, you see, I wasn't sure, it just felt right. And the spaces are there. And ending a sentence, the correct way, is I wasn't sure what to say, and you see ... and a period before the quotation mark. It looks odd, but it's correct. So by following these tips, you will be writing correctly. You might even be able to use ellipses to improve some of your writing, some of your pacing, some of your dialogue. And I hope you'll take advantage of the opportunity of putting them in when necessary and taking them out when they're not necessary. Happy writing. Subscribe to Write, Fix, Repeat. And maybe I can help you improve your writing knowledge and skills. 5 tips at a time.